operations, to their consternation. The incident was reported worldwide. The Americans were completely surprised, shocked, and embarrassed by our capabilities. They lost much face. The question and answer session went on for another 20 minutes. Then the officers were sent to an outer office. Admiral Wu wanted some time alone to mull his choices. He got out of his chair, went to a window, and lit a cigarette. That Su'a had mentioned the Americans losing face was interesting. Su'a couldn't prove a negative, of course, but the fact that the Americans were grossly embarrassed had impressed him, convinced him that what he wanted to believe was indeed true. Never would he have willingly offered such a humiliation. So he offered it as proof, which of course it was not. Wu well knew the ingrained inability of Orientals to admit mistakes or embarrass their superiors, to lose face. Some of them would defer to erroneous decisions made by their superiors, even if it cost them their lives. This cultural attitude was so ingrained that huge mistakes in the Chinese military acquisition process cost untold billions of yuan and long delays. Wu had fought this cultural foible his entire career, trying to get ships, submarines, missiles, aircraft, and finally China's sole aircraft carrier designed, built, and operational. At times he thought the shipyards, engineers, and naval officers would rather build it wrong and pretend it worked than admit a mistake. Zheng's and Sa'a's careers were in submarines. Nuke subs were the future, if they were already vulnerable to American submarines. Well, in a shooting war they wouldn't last long. Zhang. He had been entrusted with a great mission. Would he admit a mistake or an unforeseen glitch? Probably not. Ultimately, Admiral Wu decided how the Americans got interested in Ocean Holiday didn't matter. Today, what mattered was whether they knew her mission. The Beijing politicians wanted the fish in the yellow East and South China Seas, and the Gulf of Tonkin, and someday the Philippine Sea. The latest survey suggested that huge oil and natural gas deposits could be there. Using stolen American technology, the locked-up petroleum could perhaps be captured in huge economical quantities. In the years ahead, an assured source of petroleum at a reasonable cost would be vital to fuel China's growing industries. Imports cost great wads of foreign currency, and were subject to the vagaries of Middle Eastern politics, which in turn were driven by religious feuds and racial dreams. China's politicians also wanted to take over Taiwan, a goal that was popular with the Chinese masses. The politicians used the media to stoke the fire, to feed Chinese nationalism and to justify military expenditures, and indeed they would get Taiwan sooner or later. But first, the Yellow and China Seas. To intimidate the other nations around this basin, Korea, Japan, the Philippines, and Vietnam, China needed a navy that looked impressive. Not a navy that could win World War III, but a navy that could cow the neighbors, and the United States, whose navy ruled this ocean. As Wu analyzed the problem, it really didn't matter if U.S. submarines had a technological edge on Chinese submarines. What mattered was that Chinese ships and submarines were better than those of any of China's neighbors who might be inclined to fight for their rights. The Americans, well, they had sold their souls for cheap Chinese goods for Walmart. American corporations were investing billions in China. The Americans would not go to war over Vietnam's or the Philippines' rights in the China Sea. Probably. The trick was to raise that probability to a certainty, and the way to do that was to weaken the United States Navy, to do it in such a way that it could never be proven who was responsible. Japan made that mistake when they attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. The Americans knew precisely who was responsible and vowed revenge, which they took in full measure. The Admiral finished his cigarette and lit another. He stood at the window with unseeing eyes, thinking back. "You have the floor, Admiral," the paramount leader had said. The Central Military Commission met behind locked doors in an underground conference room deep inside the August 1st building in Beijing. The paramount leader was also chairman of the CMC, General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, and President of the People's Republic of China. He was a technocrat.